Good morning. We're going to be starting with the federal update, and I'm very pleased to, again, he introduced himself earlier, but to reintroduce Tom Harnisch. He's Vice President for Government Relations at the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, which we all know as SHEEO. Dr. Harnisch joined SHEEO in January of 2020 as Vice President for Governmental Relations. And he's working out of Washington, D.C., where his primary leadership responsibility is planning, implementing, and coordinating SHEEO's portfolio of federal relations, policy, communication, and advocacy work. So from 2007 to 2019, he worked in a series of roles at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, including Director of State Relations and Policy Analysis. He's known to many of us and has been at a number of MHEC meetings previously. We've also had a chance to read many of the research articles that have been in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. Join me in welcoming Dr. Tom Harnisch.
Well, thank you so much for that warm introduction. It is great to be back here at the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. Thank you, Susan, for inviting me back, and thank you to Mary and Katie and the whole team for engaging with SHEEO and all of the collaboration that you've had with us over the years. It's been just incredible fruitful, this relationship that SHEEO and MHEC have had over the years. So, as stated, I'm Tom Harnisch. I'm Vice President for Government Relations at SHEEO, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association. We are based in Washington, D.C. and Boulder, Colorado. We've been around now 70 years. We are really the state voice in American higher education. We work on a range of issues, college access, student success, completion. We're working with on a variety of issues related to student mental health, looking to was mentioned earlier, our portfolio on higher education and prisons that we're looking at. So we work really on a whole slew of issues that are important to the states on higher education. And we are a nonpartisan organization. SHEEO has 63 members nationwide. Most states have one SHEEO, some states have two. So before we get started here, I just thought didn't we have a really great speaker last night on Kansas and the commerce and all the investment that's been made in Kansas, and he talked about Kansas being a state of the unexpected. And I was reflecting on that. This is my 10th year giving the federal update here at SHEEO. My first time giving it was in 2014 in Milwaukee, and I met Susan Heegard, who was then at HCM Strategist. And I was reflecting, if I had gone to, when I was there in 2014 in front of that audience in Milwaukee, if I had told them that 10 years from now I'll be speaking to this conference, and I'll be talking about Donald Trump's second non-consecutive term in office, that he had won a race based on voters' response to inflation from a global pandemic, that the Detroit Lions are a contender for the Super Bowl, that Indiana football is currently undefeated right now, and that for whatever reason Mike Tyson was back in the ring last week. They would probably say, now, which village in Wisconsin are you from again? But it's really the state of the unexpected, and I think there's a lot of unexpected things that we're looking at in Washington on federal policy in the year ahead. So for today's presentation, I just want to cover a few issues. First of all, I'll talk about the 118th Congress that is finishing up right now with the appropriations process. some higher education issues that could emerge in the lame duck session, and then just other issues that Congress will probably be talking about as we head toward the final days of this Congress. The executive branch, I do want to talk about FAFSA. They call that the other F word over the past year. But FAFSA, of course, there's been a lot of challenges, in getting that FAFSA rolled out, and just talk about where we're at on the FAFSA for this year. I do want to hit all three branches of government, so I do want to talk about some judicial branch decisions, and then we'll look ahead to 2025 and this new administration. Okay, so where are we at on appropriations? So we are under what's right now a continuing resolution. So continuing resolutions, of course, are just patches to keep the government funded while they work to figure out what the federal budget should be. Our current CR is going to expire on December 20th. So they either need to have another CR by December 20th, or they need to pass the 12 appropriation bills. I can say right now, with this particular Congress, the House and Senate are very far apart on what the spending priorities should be. So the House right now has a narrow GOP majority. They've called for cutbacks for higher education programs, particularly teacher ed, campus child care, and some campus-based aid programs. And then the Senate has largely flat funded, maybe some modest increases. But over both this fiscal year that I'm talking about, this FY25, as well as last year, we've been on budget caps. So last year was basically flatlined, and then this year is about a 1% increase for budget caps. But it did not set a floor, and so the House GOP has wanted to rein in spending, and so they've called for cutbacks in higher education programs. So where are we at on the budget right now? So Congress is basically, Speaker Johnson has said that he'd like to have another CR and just keep the government funded until spring of next year. Democrats, Chuck Schumer, have called for end of the year omnibus, so just basically get this budget done and then clear the decks for the new administration and new Congress. There's been a few others, like Steve Scalise, have been calling for actually extending it for a full year CR to September. But I think probably the most likely option is that we'll have another CR and we'll get us to the spring, and then the new Congress and the new administration will, at that point, make determinations on spending. So this is a chart from the Committee for Education Funding, just detailing where the president's budget had come down, where the House budget, and then where the Senate is. All right. So this is just a rundown of some of the federal programs that are important to higher education. And the Pell Grant would, in the House bill, be basically flat, a little increase in the Senate. Where some of the cuts that the House are looking at are in the campus-based aid programs. So federal work-study, they would make a very sharp reduction in federal work-study funding, as well as FSEOG. So those two programs are targeted for cuts. Some of the other programs like Gear Up and TRIO are flatlined, while they've been calling for substantial cuts in campus childcare. The FIPSE program, so that's the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education, both an earmark and non-earmark. So when Congress talks about earmarks for higher education, those are often included in the FIPSE program. So the House has zeroed those out, while the Senate has called for modest increases. So that is where we are at on the budget, but we'll just have to see where negotiations are, looking at spring of next year. All right. Higher education issues. So these are some things that you could see in the waning days of the 118th Congress. So the FAFSA Deadline Act. So this would mandate a October 1 start date for the FAFSA form. We saw last year that it didn't get rolled out until, right before the ball dropped on New Year's. And of course, there were a series of glitches after that that really set us back, and we've had reductions in new students. So this would mandate going forward that the FAFSA be rolled out on October 1. And it passed with near unanimous support in the House. The higher education community is supportive of this. I know SHEEO is supportive of this. So we have a new FAFSA form. It's simplified, and we think going forward that we should be able to get the FAFSA out on October 1. So that may face a voice vote in the Senate, but we hope that from now on, the FAFSA will be required to be rolled out on October 1. The Bipartisan Stop Campus Hazing Act, this is passed the House. That would require hazing incidents to be reported under the Clery Act and require preventative educational programming. That is as the title implies, it's a bipartisan bill, so we could see efforts, and there's a companion bill in the Senate right now, so that is a bill that potentially we could see coming out of Congress this year to try to combat hazing on college campuses. And then there's the Woke Higher Education Act. This is a more partisan bill, but I'm not sure that this could get through the Senate right now. But this is another bill that there's been some activity around. Okay. Other issues that you might see as we go through the lame ducks, certainly there's been a few disasters this year, so they need to fill up the disaster relief fund. The defense authorization bill is a must-pass bill that they got to get through. The farm bill that received a one-year extension, they need to get that farm bill done. And I know with the Democrats controlling the Senate for just a few more months, that they're going to try to confirm as many judges as they can. So that is what we are looking at in the waning days of the 118th Congress. All right. So, FAFSA. They're telling me it works. So the FAFSA form is actually out now. They just released the other day that the new FAFSA is out. What they did this year, instead of getting it out on October 1, they decided to, starting October 1, that they would do a series of beta testing. So they would start small, and then they would do 4 rounds of beta testing. So now they are in the 4th and final round, and they've been working through any glitches, but they say that, according to department officials, that they have had no critical bugs reported in the new FAFSA, and that folks have come out and said that the form is working well for them. So it is on the ed.gov website, so you can access the new FAFSA form, and hopefully, unlike last year, we will have a smoother rollout.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, I was, we went to all hands on deck, general quarters, and actually ended up number 2 in the nation on FAFSA completion. The governor did all sorts of stuff. Are you confident this is going to work this time, or should we get ready again for this?
Right. I mean, we've been on calls with the Department of Education, and they said no critical bugs. So I'm just.
Are these the same people who ran it last time?
It's actually, they've had a few different people.
Okay.
So they brought in some executives from the College Board who have some experience in rolling out some of these more technical projects. So Jeremy Singer and the team at FSA, I take them at their word that the beta testing has gone well, and they've been trying to work with different special populations that potentially could run into problems. So overall, it seems like they're on a good path. Yep. And their goal was to get it out by December 1, and here we are mid-November, and they're already confident enough at the 4th beta test to put it out in the public. So,
Because, I mean, the national data showed we had the lowest freshman enrollment since COVID.
we did.
And often attributed this, so the damage was just epic, really, from this situation.
The damage is epic. There's no getting around that. And we need to be real about that freshman enrollment from last year, what was it, a 5% dip? And, of course, it varied from state to state, but that was devastating. And we need to really address that and find ways to engage with those students. And many of those, of course, are from low-income families and historically marginalized populations. So this has been a real fiasco. No, there's no question about that. Yeah. So that is where we are at on FAFSA beta testing. Court decisions. There was a big court case this year called Loper Bright Enterprises versus Ramato. And what this really case was about was administrative law. And the question is, in a situation where a statute is ambiguous, which is often the case in federal law, what do you do, right? How do you regulate on that? Well, 40 years ago, they had this decision, what they call the Chevron doctrine. And so it was a two-step approach. So has Congress spoken to the precise issue? If yes, then they give effect to the intent of Congress. If no, we go to a two-step. And what's the second step is the agency's interpretation reasonable? Yes, then we can just defer to the agency. If not, then the court can provide its own interpretation. And what this did really was it empowered federal agencies. And the theory behind that was when you're dealing with regulatory policy, a lot of these issues are really, really complicated, right? They're very much in the weeds, and the people who should know the most about this would be those who are in the various departments of the federal government. So technical experts on the environment, on education, on transportation. But the concern from the court over the past decade has been just the growth of the administrative state. And so the Supreme Court ruled this summer that we're actually not going to defer to federal agencies. And that it actually, when we have a situation where it is ambiguous, the courts are going to decide on the questions of law. Okay, so the courts should have the final say on this, and that there is a best reading from the courts and not just a permissible one. So this really is a foundational issue because it shifts a lot of power from the executive branch and all of the agencies over to the judicial branch, and it will limit regulations. So that is where we're at on the Chevron doctrine. So as we see administrations going forward, I think there's going to be more hesitancy to make policy via regulation. Why does this matter for states? Well, you have Congress, which is, I think, dysfunctional. And so there's not as much policy making going on in Congress. We haven't passed an update to the Higher Education Act since 2008. And so we have Congress that isn't passing bills. And so as we saw during the Biden era, what we saw, especially at the Department of Education, is we saw regulatory policy making. So we saw negotiated rulemaking after negotiated rulemaking after negotiated rulemaking. And that is where things have been fought, really, is in the regulatory space and in the court space. And now what I see going forward is a movement, I think, toward states. And that because policymaking can't be made as much via regulation or on Capitol Hill, so where does policy ultimately become made? And I would say more and more, they're going to look to states to make that. And, I give you an example like online program management. I mean, that was something that nationwide that maybe Congress should weigh in on, and I know Elizabeth Warren's been active on that issue, but that is stalled on Capitol Hill. And so we've seen states actually take up to regulate online program managers. So we could have more of a patchwork of 50 states going in 50 different directions. Now, they all do that, of course, now to a different degree, but I think there's just going to be more pressure on states to step up and make policy on certain issues. Also in the courts, loan forgiveness and Title IX. And I'll get more into this later, but the Biden administration, of course, has been very active in pushing an agenda on broad-based student loan forgiveness. There's been a lot of pushback from GOP attorney generals on that, and that's been caught up in the courts. Also, his SAVE plan, which has been a very generous student loan repayment plan, that's been caught up in the courts. Title IX, we've gone from Obama era, which had guidance on Title IX, then the Trump era, the first Trump era, which was regulations on Title IX, and now we go to the Biden era, which revised some of the Trump era regulations, put in new regulations, and I think that effort is likely to be abandoned. So if you see Biden era efforts in higher education on student loans, loan forgiveness, loan repayment, Title IX, I think those are likely to be abandoned by the upcoming administration. And then lastly, the overtime rule. So this came out just the other day. So the overtime rule is something that, again, has been volleying back and forth between different administrations. It was starting in 2004, the overtime threshold for non-exempt employees was at $23,000. President Obama wanted to bump that up to $47,000 in the waning years of his administration. There was a court decision that went against him. The Trump administration came in and put it at $35,000. Then Biden came in, President Biden came in and wanted to bump the $35,000 threshold up to $58,000. But now, again, in the waning days of his administration, there's been a court case in the Eastern District of Texas to block that, and we're likely to go, I think, back to the $35,000. So this, of course, is important to higher education, simply because there are added costs involved on overtime-related issues. And I think the Trump administration, of course, is unlikely to continue the Biden effort to raise the overtime threshold to $58,600. So overtime is something is an unsettled area to watch. Okay. And again, does this apply to all higher education employees, this overtime rule? It doesn't. It does not apply to faculty, for instance, but it does apply to other people in higher education that meet those meet the threshold requirements as well as a few other requirements. But if they go over their 40 hours a week, then they would have to be paid overtime. Okay. So let's get into the 2024 election, and we'll talk about the incoming Trump administration. So what we have in the House is actually right now in the 118th Congress is the GOP has a very slim majority. And we go into the 119th Congress, the House is going to have a very slim GOP majority. So I think that Mike Johnson is going to continue as Speaker and Hakeem Jeffries as Minority Leader. So this was where the balance of power was at as of Sunday. I think it'll probably be 221 Republicans. So you need, again, 218 to have the majority. Right. And then for the 119th Congress, the House Education and Workforce Committee. So Virginia Fox has been the chair of that committee. She is stepping down as chair. And we're likely to see a competition between two members of that committee, Burgess Owens, he's a Republican of Utah, and Tim Walberg from Michigan. And I know Representative Walberg has been focusing very much on workforce-related issues. Burgess Owens, I think he would focus, of course, on workforce issues too, and he's stated his support for closing Department of Education. But what I see is interesting probably in the next few years is, could there be a window with this new committee for passing a College Transparency Act? And the reason why I bring that up is because Virginia Fox was actually the author of a bill to ban, in 2008, a federal unit record data system for higher education. And so as long as she was in that chair, that was not going to pass. And potentially we could see a new effort to try to pass that College Transparency Act. So that is something that the higher education community, I know SHEEO and my colleagues at ASCU and elsewhere, APLU, we have been pushing for now 20 years to try to have a federal unit record data system to track students throughout their educational journey. And just there's been pushback, I know, with Representative Fox, where she has drawn the line is basically we can have a federal unit record data system only for participants in federal programs. So if you are in Title IV financial aid, veterans benefits, WIOA, if you touch federal benefits, then the federal government should be allowed to track you. But for the rest of the students, and maybe that's 30% or so, that rest of the 30%, we're not going to track them. That's where kind of she's drawn the line on that. But for others in higher education community, they want to see that all people who touch our higher education system are tracked throughout their educational journey. So this is an area, again, that I think there'll be increased focus on in the years ahead. And then Workforce Pell. I've gotten some questions about a Workforce Pell. This is an area or a policy that has a bipartisan support. So this would take, right now, the minimum threshold is 15 weeks for a Pell Grant. This would take it down to very short-term programs, so like 8 weeks. And this has strong support from the community college associations, and a number of other higher education groups as well. It's just one of the real concerns about this has been certainly the cost of extending Pell to these short-term programs, as well as quality. Because some of they're concerned about the short-term programs not providing good value. So there's been a bipartisan bill from the House Democrats and House Republicans to put some guardrails on developing a workforce Pell and some outcomes on that. But on the Senate side, there is broad support in the Senate for passing workforce Pell. But one of the concerns that they have on the Senate side is whether for-profit colleges should be allowed to participate. And that's where they've drawn a pretty stark red line. Bernie Sanders in particular has just expressed his concern about, his team has expressed their concern about having these short-term programs, allowing for-profits to participate, and potentially turning it into a bonanza of waste, fraud, and abuse. So again, that is an area where I think that we will get a workforce Pell bill, but it will occur in the next few years. So in the Senate, Republicans made some gains in the Senate, and the new majority leader after many years will be Senator John Thune of South Dakota. And Chuck Schumer is likely to continue on in this role now as minority leader. And what that makes the Senate Education Committee will flip then. And so we will have Senator Bill Cassidy. He is a Republican of Louisiana. He is a medical doctor, so it's the first time in almost a century that we've had a medical doctor in charge of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And he has a series of priorities for education. So his big one, of course, is the College Transparency Act that I brought up earlier. But he also has a few other things, a few other items in his higher education package. He wants to create uniform financial aid letters, provide more clearer information about student loans. He wants to, there's a whole, of course, labyrinth of loan repayment programs that he wants to reduce down to two, so a standard program and then an income-based program, and then end graduate plus loans and limit graduate school borrowing. About half of our federal student loan portfolio right now is in that graduate space, graduate school loans, and there's just been concern about the sustainability of that and just how many loans are being taken out these days for graduate school, and what is the appropriate role of the federal government? Should we have caps on that on graduate school borrowing, and the value that some of those graduate schools provide to students? So we'll see. I think, and he has been said he's going to be more focused on education in this term than the current chairman was Bernie Sanders, and this committee has pretty broad jurisdiction over health, education, labor, and pensions. Bernie Sanders was much more focused on the L of health committees, so the labor and labor unions. He does have, of course, his bill on free college that he introduces every year, but Senator Cassidy has said that he is going to use his time as chair to really hone in on education-related issues. Okay. And then other issues he's spoken out about, he's opposed to DEI spending, he's opposed to Biden loan forgiveness, and of course he's expressed concern over some of the campus protests on the Middle East. Okay, any questions about Congress in the next administration? Yeah.
Two questions. One, on the prior slide, you referenced like workforce issues. Like what else is entailed in that bullet as far as like what are some other priorities that you think may come up on workforce issues? And then related, or not related, for the folks who are interested in like terminating the Department of Education, is there a emerging plan of where they think various functions will land?
Right, so to take the second question on where things would land, the plan that I've seen laid out in Project 2025 and a few other ones is that workforce-related issues, to the extent that they're at Department of Education, would be rolled into the Department of Labor. And during President Trump's first term, he presented a plan to merge the Department of Education to the Department of Labor. So I think that with workforce-related issues, the plan at least would be to transition them over to labor. Other workforce issues, I'll be frank with you, I haven't been as involved in that space, but I know that WIOA has been a topic of conversation, but I'm not exactly sure where that's at on that, but that is a focus I know from my community college friends that they've been very interested in.
And is the plan for, would sort of student loan programs, grant programs, would that land at Treasury, or is that the?
Yep, so Treasury, again, with their plan, that Treasury would be in charge of the student loan portfolio, and then with the data would go over to Census. The OCR, which oversees civil rights, will go over to the Department of Justice. So those are just, again, what I've seen in some of the blueprints as they seek to pursue changes to the Department of Education. Other questions on, before we get to the Trump? Yeah. Right.
So there are well, community colleges that are concerned, and associated associations and academies that are concerned about the DEI language, the potential for the things to happen with DEI. And they're looking at trying to change the language not calling it DEI, and trying to figure out where to land with this. Would you have any input or thoughts on what should this group be focusing on? I mean, is it to change the name and try to disguise what it's called, or what?
Yeah, I do think that this is going to be an area of course, of contention with the new administration. I would just urge everyone to just follow closely. I think a lot of it is going to be fought in the regulatory space or through executive orders. And it may come down to something where and I know this has been true in some states, and again, I don't want to over-speculate about things, but I know some states have used different words to describe some of their activities. Instead of calling it DEI, they might call it student success, which, again, a broader umbrella. But I don't want to, of course, speculate on what the administration's going to do in that space. But I think from the previous administration, or from the previous 4 years of Donald Trump, that there were executive orders, I know, that targeted DEI. And there could be, with Senator Cassidy has expressed his opposition to DEI-related spending, so we could see potentially, inquiries into DEI spending in college, investigations or hearings. I'm just not sure, but it has been something that I know on the GOP side that there's been concern about spending on DEI-related issues. Yep. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. I would just say our state, Kansas, passed legislation this last year related to DEI, and really, and I'm not saying it would be similar, but looked at limiting. So now when someone applies, they don't give statements to any ideology,
Sure.
including diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's throughout the system. And then there was a requirement to post any of the training online just to make it transparent. And so we've complied with those, with that law. And I could see something being similar to that.
Right. It could come to like federal contracts and as requirements related to federal contracts. Yep. Okay.
I can hold the question after the Senate. You're going to talk about, just anything on the Create AI Act, if you can be thinking about that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, I haven't, I'd welcome your input on that. I haven't been following that as closely.
Yeah, I think all of us should pay attention to it. So there's obviously this massive event, this emergence of artificial intelligence, and I'm a former historian of technology. It's the biggest thing in the history of this planet, I'll be quite frank. I'm on the Secretary of Navy's advisory board, and the President Princeton's on the board, and he's starting an initiative, probably be in touch with some of your universities to help the Navy in this arms race of machines. But Senator Schumer has this Create AI Act where the idea is to democratize access to AI. New York is going big in this massive Combined CHIPS Act, and I met with the Chancellor of New York, and they're building their massive machine near Niagara Falls, no surprise with all the electricity. But their whole goal is not to be subordinate to Amazon, Microsoft, and all these massive companies, because if you've been watching, the cost to use this stuff is just doing this. I'm teaching a class on AI, and I find the very powerful function of AI is to read Adobe PDFs and summarize them, right? You get a 30-page article, and I'll give this, I have to pay $5 a month to use this, across 55,000 students. We're talking $3 million alone just in our university system to use the AI Adobe function, So anyway, Schumer has this bill called Create AI Act, and it would build a massive machine, kind of analogous to the Library of Congress in the days of books, but there would be a board created out of professors at FFRDCs that would decide what is worthy for the use of the machine. So you can imagine. So I gave feedback to our senators who are looking at it, but I suggested that there would need to be an oversight committee of like one U.S. senator from each state.
Okay.
So that for example, we do lots of animal research. We do energy research. Somebody's saying that's not worthy of using the supercomputer. So anyway, it'd be very interesting if you find out, because I know Schumer wanted to push it, but I suspect this president with Elon Musk and others is probably conflicted about this, though Musk is not happy, what OpenAI is now going profitable. So anything you get on that, you can email out. I think that would be something worthy of MEC and others to get involved in, on suggesting language on how we feel about it in the coming administration.
Yeah, and I know, so like you said, some states have been very active, New York, but other states have been setting up task forces and commissions on AI. My only hope is that I teach at nights, and I hope that my students are submitting work that is actually their own. But that is a very, again, very growing space right now. It's rapidly evolving, and it's exciting. It really is. So we'll get in now to these are our last 10 minutes or so to talk about the incoming Trump administration. So where will they start next year? So I would just say, some have asked about who I think will be the Secretary of Education. I'm not sure. Secretary of Education is usually someone from the K-12 environment, and it's never been a higher ed person. So it's someone from, probably someone from K-12, and probably someone who's been active on the school choice movement. But I'm not sure of any particular names that I'd even hazard a guess right now. So with the incoming Trump administration, I think there's going to be a few different areas that they're going to target. Of course, they're going to have the nominations at the beginning of the year and the confirmation hearings. And then from there, the focus on that first quarter probably is going to be to figure out what they want to do with that budget. That's overdue right now. So they will have nominations, we'll have budget. And then as the administration takes shape, I think they're going to target regulations from the Biden era. So with a regulation, again, if a regulation has gone through the entire process, it is then at that point considered law. Then you have to restart the process in order to unravel a regulation. So that usually takes about 18 months to 2 years to get a regulation off the books when it's been on the books. So gainful employment and financial transparency, this targets the for-profit college sector mostly, about the value of some of those for-profit college programs. This is something we talked earlier about volleying back and forth between administrations. Obama administration had been pushing the gainful employment regulations in the wake of some of those meltdowns of for-profit colleges in about 2010 or so. And then we got to the Trump administration. They the first Trump administration got rid of gainful, and now the Biden administration came back with gainful, and now the second Trump administration's like to get rid of gainful again. So there's been a whole about 15-year saga on the gainful employment regulations that have involved multiple negotiated rulemakings and court cases and everything, just because, again, there's a lot at stake with that gainful employment regulation. On Title IX, again, about half the country is under right now the Biden-era Title IX regulations, and the other half is under the Trump era, and that is due to court cases. I think probably most of the Midwest is probably still under the Trump era regulations, but I would say that those Title IX regulations that are in court right now, that is likely to be abandoned by the Trump administration. So I think we will likely revert back to the old Trump era regulations on Title IX. I think one of the issues that is particularly a flashpoint is the transgender student protections. So that is likely to be rolled back. Student loan forgiveness efforts. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the Biden era has been, the Biden folks have been very aggressive on student loan forgiveness. They've tried to use different laws over the years to try to push a broad-based student loan forgiveness agenda. That is likely to be curtailed along with his SAVE plan. The SAVE plan is is a very generous student loan repayment plan, and that SAVE plan is caught up in the courts right now, and the Trump folks will likely abandon efforts to try to maintain that SAVE program. Yeah, David.
Tom, what about the public service loan forgiveness program?
Right. The Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is in law, so you have to consider that passed bipartisan in 2000 and 2007. And one of the hallmarks of the Biden era is to try to make that program work. And for a long time, it was on the books, but only 90% plus of people were not actually getting their loans forgiven. And so how the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program works is after 10 years of income-based repayment, you get your student loans forgiven. And for a long time, people went through that, but for bureaucracy, for paperwork reasons and the like, they actually never got their loans forgiven. So the Biden folks have been working over the years to try to make that, and they've been very aggressive in forgiving student loans for those who have fulfilled the 10 years of obligations under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And I think that it's unclear exactly where the Trump administration will come down. There could be regulations potentially on public service loan forgiveness around the edges, but I think the program is pretty popular. I think it's going to stay on the books. I would say long-term that there is a lot of concern on Capitol Hill about that program and just the general cost involved in that. So potential movements in the years ahead to try to either eliminate, there's going to be some efforts, and there are some efforts actually to eliminate public service loan forgiveness, or at the very least curtail how much loans are forgiven at the end of the day. Okay. But that program does, I would say, does have some pretty strong support, but just the price tag has definitely ruffled some feathers. Okay. Any regulation that has not fully completed the rulemaking process is likely to be discontinued. So we've heard a whole bunch of, folks from the Biden Harris administration talking about, they want to do state authorization. They have a whole list of regulations that they would like to do in 2025. That's, if it hasn't gone through the full regulatory process and it's not on the books, it's likely to be discontinued. So deregulation is going to be, I think, one of the first orders of business, just because that is something that the administration has direct control over. Immigration is another area. I've received some questions from SHEEOs and members of the higher education community just about deportations, just because I know some states have benefits for undocumented students, and what if the federal government started to subpoena information of states to try to get at that information? It's unclear where the future goes with that issue. I would just say from the incoming administration has said they were going to target those with criminal histories as far as their efforts to step up on deportations. So I don't know much beyond that. It's just that there is some concern in the higher education community about undocumented students. Financing is of course an area that the Trump administration is going to be active on. It's unclear how they're going to go about this or what issues that they're going to take up. But one area that I think the GOP has been focused on is risk sharing. So risk sharing is if I'm a college, I give out a loan, someone fails to repay the loan, then the institution is on the hook for a percentage of that. At least that's in general the theory. And there's been, again, some interest in that idea, but there's also concern about how that could affect college access, particularly for taking in low-income students and students from historically underserved communities. Loan caps, I think, will be another area where there'll be interest, just because the College Cost Reduction Act has that's the Republican bill in the House, so that could be used as a framework. That is a bill where they would phase out those graduate plus loans. They would put caps on student lending, and what those would do is that would provide a lot of savings to the federal government. And so that is, again, areas where they might be focused on, because those savings would provide funding for other priorities as well. And then other issues that the administration could focus on, free speech, combating anti-Semitism, and new restrictions on DEI spending, as I mentioned earlier. We've seen, of course, over the past 2 years, particularly in the House, a series of hearings on anti-Semitism, and I think we're going to continue to see a focus from the new administration on combating anti-Semitism in higher education. And then these are just taken from the Agenda 47, which is the incoming administration. This is just quotes from them. They do want to target accreditation. They're concerned about a bias in accreditation. Accreditation is in the law, but there's also regulations on it, so potentially they could focus on accreditation. And then driving down tuition costs, due process, which I think is a focus of Title IX. They've been focused more on due process in Title IX regulations, and then civil rights cases against schools that discriminate. So that is one part of their agenda, and as well as alternatives to the traditional four-year degree. It is interesting, and I know I just have a few minutes, but the last campaign, both the Trump and the Harris campaign, really focused on alternatives to the traditional college degree. If you looked at Harris's platform, and I don't know how many pages it was, but there were very few references to college affordability, and a whole series of provisions in there and ideas about alternatives to college. And of course, the Trump administration has this quote in their agenda, but also just the Harris administration, or the Harris campaign, had sort of a similar tact as far as pathways to jobs that don't involve a college degree. So then the Trump statements, the abolish the Department of Education. This would require an act of Congress. I think they'd have to get to the 60-vote threshold in the Senate, which would be extraordinarily difficult, just because I don't see 7 Democrats coming across the board to help them abolish the Department of Education. But it could, if they decide to get rid of the filibuster, then this is something that potentially could be on the table. But generally, to do pretty sweeping things, such as abolish the Department of Education, you often need sweeping majorities, and they have a very thin majority in the House and a somewhat thin majority in the Senate too. So now they could take maybe pieces of this, as we mentioned earlier, such as moving things to different divisions or different departments, such as moving things over to Treasury or Department of Labor and the like. But a wholesale abolishing of the Department of Education, I would find to be extremely unlikely. He also mentioned creating a federally funded online university, and then more taxes on university endowments. Right now there is a 1.4% tax on the very wealthiest college endowments. So I'm talking your Harvards, your Princetons, your Yales. But I do think that's an area where the administration could be active in targeting more taxes. Okay? Yeah.
This online university, do you know any more about that? That's the first time I've seen it.
Yeah, so President-elect Trump said that in one of his videos, that he wants to create a federally funded online university. He also mentioned that it won't be woke and won't be biased like higher education is right now, and that.
Is it more than just a passing sentence, or is this something backed up in studies?
I haven't seen any studies on creating a federally funded online university. It's just that this is just something that he said that he wanted to do, and that he merged it with some of his pronouncements on wokeness in higher education. That's what I know about it. But there have been, over the years, a lot of proposals, or there have been, going back to George Washington, there have been proposals to create a federal university. And so this,
Seems philosophically to go against what he's talking about.
I know.
It just seems philosophically, he wants to reduce the influence in Washington, but now have a federal university. It just seems very,
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't know how serious or aggressive they'll be on this, or is this just something that was more political rhetoric that he put out in a video? It's unclear at this point.
yeah, thank you. First I heard that.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. Oh, sorry, we're over on minutes. So I will just say this. This is from Project 2025. This is something that the campaign disavowed, but I would say that people who wrote this used to work in his first administration. So there's a list there of some of the things that they would like to do in the next administration. But this is, again, something that the Trump administration did disavow. Okay. Yeah.
I don't expect an answer to this, but it's something that has puzzled me for a long time. We talk about education and why our children should be educated, and how that education contributes to the economy, how we want our children to be successful, and we want them to eventually be good taxpayers, run for office, help govern the democracy, and how to make the world a better place, basically. Of all the topics and policies we could have, why has education become so controversial? For all those reasons we say it's important, why is it so controversial in many ways? Who feels most threatened by it? And how can we become a better country if we're fighting over people being educated?
Right.
You know, and so that's a topic that I can't figure out. I can think of
Right.
so many other topics we should really be fighting over. But why this particular one? Or is it because it manages the mind and it keeps people captive, or they're not free?
Right. It's a great question. I know that we're out of time. I would say, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. I do want to answer it.
That is why I said I didn't expect an answer.
Well, I
We
would
don't
say-
have enough time. But
I
it's
would
something-
say that as we saw, at least politically in this last election, and going back to my own kind of philosophy on this, and not speaking for SHEEO here, but just saying that for me, the dividing line between where we're at right now and what we used to be in the past. Remember, the Higher Education Act used to be a bipartisan bill, passed with broad majorities. It wasn't particularly controversial. And now we're at a situation where we can't even get close to the Higher Education Act passing Congress. And I would say just a few things. I would say that at least nationally, for the Higher Education Act in particular, it's built on a whole series of assumptions about from the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s that I think are outdated, such as, what is the role of the states? Will states contribute, continue to robustly fund education? Do all education programs provide good value? There's a whole bunch of assumptions baked into it, and I think for some of those assumptions that they just don't pan out anymore. And so at the federal level, we've kind of hit a crossroads as what direction that we want to go. And we're really confronting really fundamental questions about the role of states, accountability, outcomes that we may have kind of glossed over in the past. Politically, I would say that for me, looking at where we used to be, Democrats and Republicans used to, regardless, whether you're a college graduate or not, there wasn't this huge divide that we have right now between Democrats and Republicans as far as college educated and who you vote for. I think what I saw was the political divide starting in really 2008, with that recession. And that recession was really hard on everybody, but I think it was really hard on those without college educations. And if you have a college education these days, I think you're, much more likely to withstand some of the economic challenges, the global economic challenges that we've seen over the past, 10 or 15 years of the pandemic, with the meltdown in 2008. And I think that leads to divides in our country. So just my personal interest, just my personal philosophy on that, but yeah. So, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Just give him a round of applause, guys.